At our wedding reception, my wife's mother stood up and sneered. "This poor boy thinks he can provide for my daughter? She's just using him until someone better comes along." My bride laughed along with her. I stayed silent. But when they arrived at my house weeks later, they got a huge surprise. You know how they say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life? Yeah, well, whoever came up with that bullshit clearly never met my mother-in-law. The whole reception had been going smooth as butter up until that moment. And I mean picture perfect, Instagram-worthy smooth. The kind of smooth that makes you think maybe, just maybe, you actually pulled off this whole adult who has his crap together thing. The flowers were pristine, the band was hitting all the right notes, and even my cheap-ass tuxedo rental was holding up without any wardrobe malfunctions. Hell, I was actually starting to believe I might make it through the night without embarrassing myself in front of Eden's fancy pants family and their country club friends. But then Naomi Caldwell had to go and open her mouth. I should have seen it coming, honestly. The woman had been circling me like a vulture ever since Eden, and I got serious, always with that predatory smile that made my skin crawl. She had this way of looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her designer shoe, which, knowing her, probably cost more than my monthly rent. But I figured, hey, it's her daughter's wedding day. Surely even the ice queen herself would keep her claws sheathed for one night, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. There I was, standing next to my beautiful bride, feeling like maybe I'd actually won the lottery for once in my sorry-ass life. When Naomi stood up with that crystal champagne flute in her perfectly manicured hand, the room went quiet. You know that expectant hush that falls over a crowd when someone's about to make a speech? Everyone turned to look at her, all smiles and anticipation, phones already out to record what they thought would be some heartwarming mother-of-the-bride moment for the ages. If only they knew what was coming. Naomi cleared her throat with this theatrical little cough, like she was some kind of Broadway star preparing for her big solo number. She had this smile on her face, not warm, not loving, but sharp, razor sharp, the kind of smile that should have had warning sirens going off in my head, but I was too caught up in the moment to pay attention to my gut instincts. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice carrying that fake sweet tone that rich ladies perfect in finishing school or wherever the hell they learn to be professionally passive-aggressive. The room perked up even more, guests raising their glasses in anticipation of some touching sentiment about love and family and all that Hallmark movie garbage. Instead, she looked right at me with those cold blue eyes and said, clear as a bell and loud enough for every single person in that room to hear, "This poor boy thinks he can provide for my daughter? She's just using him until someone better comes along." I swear to God, time stopped. Like, literally froze. You could have heard a pin drop in that reception hall. Hell, you could have heard a pin drop 3 counties over. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every laugh caught in someone's throat. Every clink of silverware against plates just stopped. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the entire universe, except for the sound of my heart hammering against my ribcage so hard I was pretty sure it was visible through my shirt. The worst part? The absolute worst part wasn't even Naomi's words, as soul-crushing as they were. No, the worst part was what happened next. Because right there, in front of God, our families, our friends, and every single person we'd invited to celebrate what was supposed to be the beginning of our happily ever after, Eden laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh. Not an awkward giggle because she didn't know what else to do. She threw back her head and really laughed. Deep, genuine, the kind of laugh you share with someone when they've just told the funniest joke you've ever heard. The kind of laugh that says, "Oh my God, you're so right. That's hilarious." She and Naomi were looking at each other like they were sharing some private joke, some secret that everyone else in the room was too stupid to understand. And maybe we were too stupid to understand, because I sure as hell didn't get what was so damn funny about publicly humiliating the groom at his own wedding reception. I felt every pair of eyes in that room turn to me, waiting to see what I'd do. Some folks looked embarrassed. For me, not with me. Others looked like they wanted to crawl under their tables and disappear. My cousin Tommy, who'd had a few too many beers, started to stand up with this look on his face like he was about to throw down right there in the middle of the dance floor. Even the waitstaff had stopped what they were doing, frozen with their trays halfway to tables, watching this train wreck unfold in real time. My dad, Otis, God bless him, started to push back from his chair. I could see it in his weathered face, that protective instinct that had gotten him into bar fights when I was a kid and someone said something sideways about his family. His hands were already curled into fists, and I knew he was about 2 seconds away from standing up and giving Naomi Caldwell a piece of his mind that would have made a sailor blush. But my mom, Linda, quick as lightning, reached over and grabbed his arm, pulling him back down into his seat with a look that said, "Not here, not now, not like this." Smart woman, my mom. She knew what I was too shocked to realize in that moment. That making a scene would only make things worse. That getting into a shouting match with my new mother-in-law in front of all these people would just prove whatever point Naomi thought she was making about me not being good enough for her precious daughter. So I did what any red-blooded American man would do in that situation. Absolutely nothing. I stood there like a deer in headlights, my smile frozen on my face like someone had painted it on with concrete. I felt that smile getting stiffer and more unnatural by the second, but I couldn't seem to make my face do anything else. It was like my brain had just packed up and left for vacation, leaving my body to figure out how to handle this catastrophe on its own. The DJ, bless his soul, must have realized that someone needed to save this sinking ship, because the music suddenly kicked back in, some generic wedding reception song that was supposed to get people back to celebrating and pretending like nothing had happened. The conversation slowly started back up, awkward and stilted at first, like everyone was trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed a public execution disguised as a wedding toast. And then Eden, my beautiful, laughing bride, grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the dance floor like nothing had happened. Like her mother hadn't just announced to our entire wedding party that I was a worthless gold digger who wasn't worth the powder to blow him to hell. Like she hadn't just actually laughed, at the idea that I thought I could take care of her. We swayed to the music, her arms around my neck, that perfect wedding dress swishing around her legs, and to anyone watching from across the room, we probably looked like the picture of newlywed bliss. But inside my head, I was hearing that laugh over and over again. That genuine, delighted laugh that told me everything I needed to know about what my new wife really thought of me. I was the fool in the room, all right. The only question was how long it had taken everyone else to figure out what Eden and Naomi had apparently known all along. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up marrying the devil's daughter in the first place. Because trust me, it wasn't like I woke up one morning and thought, you know what would make my life complete? A wife who thinks I'm a walking ATM with commitment issues. No, like most train wrecks, this one started out looking pretty damn good from a distance. It was 3 years ago at my cousin Danny's backyard barbecue. One of those typical summer parties where the beer flows like water and everyone pretends they're not getting too old for this shit. Danny had this tiny postage stamp of a yard behind his rental house, but he'd strung up some lights and dragged out a grill that looked like it had survived at least 2 house fires. Nothing fancy, just good people, cheap beer, and the kind of relaxed vibe that makes you forget you've got work in the morning. I was standing around the cooler, probably 3 beers deep, and debating whether to grab another one or pace myself, when I saw her. Eden was perched on the edge of Danny's rickety porch steps, and I swear to God, it was like someone had turned up the contrast on the whole damn party. She had this long dark hair that caught the light from those cheap string bulbs, and she was wearing this sundress that was somehow both casual and elegant, the kind of thing that probably cost more than my car payment, but didn't scream, "Look at me, I'm expensive." She was talking to some girl I didn't recognize, but even from across the yard, I could tell she had this magnetic quality that made people lean in when she spoke. You know how some people just command a room without even trying? That was Eden. She wasn't the loudest person there or doing anything particularly attention-grabbing, but somehow she was the center of gravity for that whole corner of the party. Now, I'm not usually the type to just walk up to strange women at parties. I mean, I've got decent game when I need to, but I'm more of a wait for the right moment kind of guy rather than a charge in like a bull in a china shop type. But something about her made me throw my usual playbook out the window. Maybe it was the beer talking, or maybe it was the way she laughed at something her friend said, genuine and unguarded, nothing like that calculated laugh I'd hear at my wedding reception years later. So I did what any self-respecting guy would do. I waited for her friend to go to the bathroom, then swooped in with all the smooth confidence of a guy who definitely hadn't spent 10 minutes psyching himself up by the cooler. "Let me guess," I said, settling down next to her on those wobbly steps. Your team Netflix or team Hulu in the great streaming wars? Yeah, I know. Smooth as sandpaper, right? But she didn't roll her eyes or give me that seriously. That's your opening line? Look that I probably deserved. Instead, she grinned and said, please. I'm team, whatever has the show I'm binge-watching this week. Currently obsessing over some British crime drama where everyone has accents so thick I need subtitles. And just like that, we were off to the races. We ended up talking for 2 hours straight about TV shows, about the party, about how Danny's grill was definitely a fire hazard waiting to happen. She had this way of making everything sound interesting, even mundane stuff like her job at some marketing firm downtown. More importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, which, let me tell you, was not something I was used to from women who looked like they stepped off a magazine cover. The really crazy part? She actually texted me the next day. Not 3 days later after playing some bullshit game of Hard to Get. Not a week later when she was bored and had exhausted her other options. The next damn day, with a message that said, so I found another British crime show. Think you can handle subtitles? With a little laughing emoji that made me grin like an idiot at my phone during my lunch break. Our first official date was coffee at this little place downtown that she suggested. Somewhere I'd walked past 100 times, but never gone into because it looked like the kind of spot where a cup of regular coffee cost more than a full meal at Denny's. But Eden made it seem normal, chatting with the barista like they were old friends and ordering some complicated drink with more syllables than my last name. I stuck with regular coffee and tried not to wince when I saw the price. Coffee turned into dinner the next week. Dinner turned into weekend sleepovers at my place. And before I knew it, she was practically living in my modest 2-bedroom apartment. I say practically because she kept insisting on maintaining her own lease across town because of her roommate situation, which should have been my first red flag right there. I mean, who keeps paying rent on an apartment they never sleep in just because of a roommate? But I was too caught up in the whole whirlwind romance thing to ask too many questions. My buddies thought I'd hit the jackpot. Cannon, who's been my friend since high school and has never met a situation he couldn't turn into a joke, kept slapping me on the back and saying stuff like, dude, how the hell did you land a woman like that? Did you save her from a burning building or something? Beck, who worked construction with me and was usually the voice of reason in our group, just nodded approvingly and said I seemed happier than he'd seen me in years. And I was happy. Those first few months were like living in some kind of romantic comedy where everything just clicked. Eden would show up at my place after work with takeout from restaurants I'd never heard of, and we'd curl up on my secondhand couch watching whatever show she was obsessed with that week. She'd steal my hoodies and look better in them than I ever did. She'd laugh at my stupid jokes and make me feel like I was the funniest guy in the world instead of just some construction worker with a decent sense of humor and a tendency to make smart-ass comments about everything. But then I met her mother. Naomi Caldwell was everything I'd expected and worse. Eden had warned me that her mom could be a little intense, which was like saying the Grand Canyon was a little deep. We met at some upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and servers who acted like they were doing you a personal favor by taking your order. The menu didn't have prices on it, which I'd always heard was a bad sign for guys like me who actually had to worry about money. From the moment I walked in, I felt like I was being inspected, not welcomed, not evaluated, inspected like I was livestock at a county fair and Naomi was trying to decide if I was worth the feed it would take to keep me alive. She looked me up and down with those cold blue eyes that Eden had inherited but somehow made warm, taking in my khakis and button-down shirt that I'd bought specifically for this occasion at JCPenney. The whole meal was an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. Where did I work? What were my career aspirations? Did I have any plans for advancement in my field? She kept using air quotes around words like career and advancement, like she couldn't quite believe that what I did for a living qualified for such fancy terminology. Meanwhile, she kept glancing at my watch, a basic Timex that told time just fine, but apparently didn't scream successful provider material. The real kicker came when Eden excused herself to go to the restroom, leaving me alone with Naomi for the first time all evening. The woman didn't even wait for Eden to be out of earshot before leaning across the table and dropping her voice to this conspiratorial whisper. "You seem like a nice enough young man," she said. and I should have known from that fake sweet tone that she was about to verbal body slam me. But I hope you understand that Eden is used to a certain lifestyle. A lifestyle that, frankly, you're going to struggle to provide. I laughed it off at the time, made some joke about how love conquers all, and other Hallmark bullshit that I didn't even believe myself. But looking back now, I realized that Naomi Caldwell wasn't making small talk or even being passively aggressive. She was laying down the ground rules for a game I didn't even know I was playing. And the worst part? She wasn't even wrong about the struggling part. So there I was, thinking I was going to be all romantic and shit, planning this perfect proposal at the little lake where Eden and I had our first real date outside the city. You know the spot. One of those hidden gems that locals keep secret from tourists, where you can actually hear yourself think instead of car horns and sirens. We'd packed this cheap-ass picnic from the grocery store deli counter, spread out an old blanket that smelled faintly of my mom's fabric softener, and just enjoyed being together without any distractions. I'd been carrying that ring around for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, practically burning a hole in my jacket pocket every time we went anywhere together. It wasn't anything fancy. I'm talking about a modest little diamond that cost me 2 months' salary and probably looked like a Cracker Jack prize next to the rocks her rich friends were sporting. But it was honest, you know? Bought and paid for with money I'd actually earned, not some trust fund bullshit or daddy's credit card. When I finally got down on one knee by that lake, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might actually explode right there on the spot. Eden squealed. And I mean full volume, Wake the Dead squealed, like she'd just won the lottery. She said yes before I even finished my stumbling, nervous speech about wanting to spend the rest of my life with her. Then came the selfies. Jesus Christ, the selfies. I swear she took 50 pictures from every conceivable angle, making sure the ring caught the sunlight just right, posing like she was shooting a goddamn engagement announcement for Town and Country magazine. But here's the thing that should have set off alarm bells in my thick skull. The first person she called wasn't her sister Isla, who she claimed was her best friend in the whole world. It wasn't any of her girlfriends who'd been squealing about wedding dresses since we started getting serious. Hell, it wasn't even her dad, who seemed like a decent enough guy despite being married to the Ice Queen. Nope. First call went straight to Mommy Dearest. Mom, you'll never guess what just happened. She practically screamed into the phone, holding it away from her ear so Naomi's response could probably be heard in 3 counties. I couldn't make out exactly what the dragon lady was saying, but Eden's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning, nodding and bouncing on her toes like she was getting instructions for the most important mission of her life. And that's when everything started going sideways. See, I'd always figured wedding planning would be, you know, something we'd do together. 2 people in love making decisions about their special day, compromising when they disagreed, keeping things reasonable because we weren't exactly rolling in dough. What I didn't count on was Eden transforming into some kind of wedding planning Terminator the second that ring hit her finger. Suddenly, nothing was good enough. The perfectly nice community center where my cousin had his reception? Too basic. The local florist who'd done beautiful arrangements for half the weddings in town? Not sophisticated enough. The DJ who'd kept 3 generations of my family dancing at various celebrations? We need someone with more flair. Everything had to be elite, top-tier, celebrity-level fancy. We were talking about venues that cost more per night than I made in 2 months, florists who acted like they were Michelangelo sculpting the Sistine Chapel instead of arranging some flowers, and decorators who used words like ambience and aesthetic vision with straight faces while quoting prices that made my soul leave my body. Naomi's helping coordinate everything. Eden would say whenever I tried to gently suggest that maybe we didn't need ice sculptures shaped like swans or a 7-course meal that required its own sommelier. She has connections, baby. She knows people who can make our day absolutely perfect. Perfect. That word started haunting my dreams. Perfect venue, perfect flowers, perfect music, perfect everything. All perfectly designed to drain my bank account faster than a slot machine in Vegas. And every single deposit, every payment, every small additional fee that kept cropping up somehow ended up on my credit card. Oh, Naomi's just organizing. Eden would say when I'd ask about her mother's contributions to this financial bloodbath. She's got such good taste, and she knows all the right vendors. We're so lucky she's willing to help. Help, right. The kind of help that involved spending my money while she played Wedding Planner of the Year. I started to notice that Naomi's organizing never seemed to involve her actually opening her own checkbook. She was great at pointing out the most expensive options, fantastic at explaining why we absolutely couldn't settle for anything less than perfection, but when it came time to actually pay for all this perfection, suddenly she was nowhere to be found. My savings account started bleeding out like a trauma victim in an emergency room. 20 years of careful saving, 20 years of putting away money for the future, watching those numbers climb steadily upward, all of it vanishing into the black hole of Eden's dream wedding. First the main savings went, then the emergency fund I'd promised myself I'd never touch. I watched my financial security evaporate in real time, one vendor deposit at a time. But the real kicker, the moment I should have known I was in deeper shit than I realized, was when I found myself staring at my land fund. That money wasn't just savings. It was my secret weapon, my ace in the hole, my someday I'm gonna build something that's actually mine money. 5 acres of beautiful rolling land about an hour outside the city, paid for in cash over 3 years with money I'd scraped together from overtime and side jobs. The deed was in my name and my name only, something I'd bought before Eden ever came into the picture. That land was my insurance policy, my backup plan, my little piece of the American dream that nobody else knew about. Not my parents, not my buddies, and definitely not Eden. Call it paranoia, call it caution, call it whatever you want, but something deep in my gut had told me to keep that particular asset to myself. And there I was, seriously considering dipping into that fund to pay for flowers that would be dead in a week and a reception that would be over in one night. That should have been my wake-up call. That should have been the moment I sat Eden down and said, "Hey, maybe we need to pump the brakes on this runaway wedding train before it crashes into a mountain of debt." But I was so caught up in wanting to make her happy, so convinced that this was just normal wedding stress, and everything would go back to normal once we got through the ceremony, that I actually did it. I actually touched my land money to pay for her mother's vision of the perfect wedding. At the time, I told myself it was just being practical, just good financial planning. After all, once we were married, Eden and I would be building a life together anyway. What was mine would be hers, and what was hers would be mine, right? That's how marriage works, isn't it? Looking back now, I realized that money wasn't the only thing disappearing. With every deposit I made, every compromise I accepted, every time I bit my tongue when the costs spiraled even higher, I was losing little pieces of myself. My backbone was getting softer, my bank account was getting emptier, and my future wife was getting more comfortable treating me like a human ATM with a pulse. But hey, at least it was going to be the perfect wedding, right? You'd think after dropping more money than a small country's GDP on what was supposed to be the most magical day of our lives, the actual wedding day would have been all sunshine and rainbows, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. The whole damn day felt like I was walking through some kind of elaborate performance where everyone else knew their lines except me. Don't get me wrong, everything looked picture perfect from the outside. The venue was stunning. All those overpriced flowers were arranged like something out of a fairy tale, and Eden looked absolutely gorgeous in that dress that cost more than my first car. Hell, even I cleaned up pretty decent in my rented monkey suit, though I kept tugging at the collar like it was trying to strangle me. Which, considering how much debt I'd gone into for this shindig, maybe it was. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch. I said my vows. She said hers. We exchanged rings, and the whole crowd did that collective, thing that people do at weddings when they're trying to convince themselves that love actually conquers all. For about 30 minutes there, I actually believed we were going to make it. I looked into Eden's eyes as we kissed for the first time as husband and wife, and I thought maybe all the stress, all the money, all the bullshit with Naomi had been worth it. Then came the reception. Then came that toast. Then came the laugh that's been echoing in my head like a broken record ever since. After Naomi dropped her little verbal bomb about how I was just a placeholder until someone better came along, and after Eden laughed like it was the funniest damn thing she'd ever heard, the party somehow limped back to life. People went back to their conversations, the band started playing again, and everyone pretended like nothing had happened. But I could feel it. That awkward energy hanging in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Everyone trying not to look at me directly while they whispered behind their hands. The rest of the reception was a blur of forced smiles and mechanical responses. I danced with Eden, I shook hands with relatives, I cut the cake and fed her a bite while photographers snapped away like their lives depended on it. But inside my head, all I could hear was that laugh. That genuine, delighted, "Oh my God, you're so right," laugh that told me everything I needed to know about what my new wife really thought of our marriage. Later that night, back in our hotel suite, which, by the way, was another expense that somehow landed on my credit card, I finally worked up the courage to ask her about it. Eden was sitting at the fancy vanity mirror, taking off her jewelry piece by piece, still glowing from what she clearly considered a successful evening. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual while my stomach was doing backflips. "What was that about earlier? With your mom's toast?" She looked at me in the mirror, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Annoyance, maybe? Or was it guilt? But then she rolled her eyes and turned around to face me with this exasperated expression, like I was some kind of child who didn't understand how adults were supposed to behave. "Seriously?" she said, standing up and crossing her arms. "You're really going to do this? Tonight? On our wedding night?" "I'm not trying to start a fight," I said, raising my hands in what I hoped was a peaceful gesture. Why did you laugh? Your mom basically told everyone at our wedding that you're using me, and you laughed about it." Eden's face went through this whole range of emotions. First surprise that I was actually calling her out, then irritation that I wasn't just letting it slide, then this weird kind of pity, like she felt bad for me, but not bad enough to actually explain herself. "You're being too sensitive," she finally said, turning back to the mirror to continue her jewelry removal routine. "Mom has a harsh sense of humor, okay? She always has. That's just how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it. She was just trying to be funny." Funny. I could hear my voice getting higher, but I couldn't seem to control it. "She basically called me a gold digger in reverse and said you're going to dump me the first chance you get. How is that funny?" "Because it's ridiculous." Eden snapped, spinning around to face me again. "It's so obviously not true that it's absurd." She was making a joke, and I laughed because it was so far from reality that it was actually kind of amusing. God, do you really have such little confidence in our relationship that you can't take a harmless joke? But here's the thing, and this is what really got to me. She wouldn't look me in the eyes when she said it. This woman who'd been staring at herself in mirrors all damn day, who'd spent our entire relationship being the most direct person I'd ever met, suddenly couldn't maintain eye contact while she explained why her mother's public humiliation of me was just good, clean fun. I wanted to push it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to call bullshit, to demand a real explanation, to ask her why a joke that was so obviously not true had made her laugh like it was actually hilarious. But then she played the ultimate card. "Look," she said, her voice getting softer, more pleading. "It's our wedding night. Our actual wedding night. Why do you want to spend it fighting about my mother's stupid joke? This is supposed to be special. This is supposed to be about us." And just like that, I folded. Because she was right, wasn't she? It was our wedding night. We'd just spent more money than I'd ever seen in one place on this celebration of our love. And here I was ready to ruin it over what she claimed was just a misunderstanding. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was reading too much into things because I'd never been comfortable around Naomi anyway. So I dropped it. I apologized for bringing it up, told her she looked beautiful, and we had what was supposed to be our magical wedding night in that overpriced hotel suite. But even while we were making love for the first time as husband and wife, I couldn't get that laugh out of my head. It played on repeat like some kind of torture device, making me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd just married. The honeymoon in Puerto Vallarta should have been perfect. Hell, it was perfect if you judged it by Instagram standards. Eden took enough photos to fill a dozen albums, posing on the beach at sunset, by the pool with her fancy cocktails, in front of every restaurant and landmark we visited. She looked like a goddess in every single shot, and I looked like the luckiest guy in the world standing next to her. But when the cameras were off, something was different. She was still beautiful, still charming when she needed to be, but there was this distance that hadn't been there before. Like now that we were officially married, she didn't need to try as hard to keep me interested. She'd spend hours texting on her phone while we were supposed to be having romantic dinners, claiming it was just her friends back home wanting to hear about the honeymoon. When I asked who she was texting, she'd give me this look, the same exasperated expression she'd worn in the hotel room, and say something about me being controlling or paranoid. "We just got married," she'd say. "That doesn't mean I can't have friends anymore." Which wasn't what I was saying at all, but somehow I always ended up apologizing anyway. The worst part was how she'd get that same laugh sometimes when she was on the phone. Not talking to me, not responding to something I'd said, but talking to whoever was on the other end of those constant text conversations. That same genuine, delighted laugh that I'd heard at our wedding reception. The laugh that was starting to feel like it was about me, not with me. By the time we got back home, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Honeymoon stress, adjustment to married life, whatever. But that laugh, that goddamn laugh, had burrowed into my brain like a parasite, and it wasn't going anywhere. Every time I heard it, I remembered standing in that reception hall, watching my new wife and mother-in-law share what felt like a private joke at my expense. I just had no idea how right I was. 3 weeks after we got back from our honeymoon, I was still trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. You know how your brain works overtime to protect you from stuff you don't want to believe? That's what I was doing. Working overtime to rationalize away every red flag, every weird moment, every time that damn laugh echoed in my head like a smoke alarm with a dying battery. I'd started settling into what I thought was married life. Eden had officially moved all her stuff into my apartment, finally giving up that lease she'd been holding on to for her roommate. Her clothes took over my closet, her fancy skincare products invaded my bathroom counter, and my simple bachelor pad got a rapid-fire makeover that involved a lot more throw pillows and scented candles than any reasonable human being should own. On the surface, everything looked like domestic bliss. We had our routines, coffee together in the morning, me heading off to whatever construction site was keeping me busy that week, her going to her marketing job downtown. She'd text me cute messages during the day, and I'd come home to find her curled up on the couch watching whatever British crime drama had caught her attention that week. But there were these little things that kept nagging at me, like how she'd always angle her phone away from me when she was typing, or how she'd step into the bedroom to take certain calls, claiming she didn't want to disturb me while I was watching TV, or how she'd gotten really interested in real estate websites, always leaving Zillow tabs open on her laptop like she was just casually browsing. I told myself it was normal newlywed stuff. We were still figuring out how to live together, still adjusting to being married instead of just dating. Hell, maybe she was looking at houses because she was excited about our future together, planning for when we could afford something bigger than my modest 2-bedroom apartment. Looking back now, I realize I was working harder to convince myself everything was fine than a defense attorney working a hopeless case. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always my least favorite day of the week, right in the middle of everything with nothing to look forward to. I was working on a renovation project across town, some rich family's kitchen makeover that involved more marble than a Roman temple. We'd been dealing with a busted water main all morning, and around noon, the foreman finally threw in the towel and sent us all home. "Might as well call it a day," he said, gesturing at the muddy mess where our work site used to be. "City says it'll be at least 3 hours before they get this sorted out, and we can't do jack shit until then." So there I was, heading home in the middle of a workday, actually looking forward to surprising Eden with an impromptu lunch date. Maybe we could grab some takeout from that Thai place she liked, or just order a pizza and spend the afternoon being lazy together. For the first time in weeks, I was feeling genuinely optimistic about us. I parked in my usual spot and headed up to the apartment, already planning what I'd say when I walked through the door. Something romantic and spontaneous, maybe joke about playing hooky together. I was fumbling with my keys when I heard it. Eden's voice, coming through the thin walls of our apartment building. She was laughing. That same laugh. The one from our wedding reception, the one from the honeymoon phone calls, the one that had been haunting me like a ghost I couldn't quite see but knew was there. I froze with my key halfway to the lock, straining to hear what was so damn funny. She was definitely on the phone with someone, her voice carrying that animated tone she got when she was really excited about something. "Logan has no idea," I heard her say, clear as day through our cheap apartment door. "Logan, that's me." She was talking about me, and from the context, it sure as hell didn't sound like she was bragging about what a wonderful husband I was. I stood there like an idiot, my heart hammering so hard I was surprised it wasn't echoing through the hallway. Part of me wanted to burst through that door and demand to know what the hell was going on. But a bigger part of me, The part that was already starting to suspect I wasn't gonna like what I heard kept me planted in that hallway like a statue. Jacob says the market's heating up, she continued, and my blood went cold. Jacob, her ex-boyfriend Jacob, the slick real estate agent with the perfect teeth and the BMW, who Naomi had always loved more than she'd ever pretended to tolerate me. But it was the next part that really knocked the wind out of me. We just need to establish residency before the prenup matters. Prenup. The prenup we didn't have. The prenup that had never even been discussed because I didn't have enough assets to make it worth anyone's time, or so I'd thought. I don't know how long I stood there in that hallway, listening to my wife discuss me like I was some kind of business transaction she was trying to figure out how to optimize. It could have been 5 minutes, could have been an hour. Time kind of stops when your whole world shifts on its axis, and you realize that everything you thought was real was actually just an elaborate performance. Eventually, her voice got quieter, and I heard her moving around the apartment. I finally got my shit together enough to unlock the door and walk into my own home, acting like I'd just arrived. "Hey, babe," Eden called out from the kitchen, all smiles and enthusiasm. "You're home early. How was work?" "Water main broke," I managed to say, my voice somehow staying steady despite the fact that my entire nervous system was having a meltdown. "Foreman sent us home." She came over and kissed me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just been on the phone discussing my complete ignorance of whatever scheme she and her mother and her ex-boyfriend had cooked up. Her lips felt cold against mine, or maybe that was just me going into shock. That night, after she'd fallen asleep beside me, I did something I'd never done in 3 years of being together. Something I'd never even considered doing because I trusted her, because I loved her, because I thought we were building a life together based on honesty and mutual respect. I unlocked her phone with her thumb. Have you ever had one of those moments where you know, absolutely know, that whatever you're about to discover is going to change your life forever, but you do it anyway because not knowing is worse than knowing? That's where I was at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night, scrolling through my wife's text messages like some kind of amateur detective. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined in my most paranoid moments. Pages and pages of messages between Eden and Naomi, laying out their plan in excruciating detail. How they'd use my credit and my income to secure a house. How Eden would establish residency and legal claim to the property. How they'd work the system to make sure she walked away with as much as possible when she eventually filed for divorce. There were messages with Jacob that made my skin crawl, a mixture of business planning and flirtation that left no doubt about what kind of relationship they were planning to resume once I was out of the picture. Real estate advice mixed with inside jokes and suggestions about getting together to discuss the market that had nothing to do with property values. But the one that really broke me was an email from Naomi to Eden, dated just 2 days after our wedding. The subject line was "Timeline Update," and the contents were laid out like a business plan. 3 months should be sufficient to establish legal residency and joint financial responsibility, it read. Jacob has identified several properties that would work for our purposes. Once the legal groundwork is in place, we can begin the transition phase. Remember, the key is patience. Too fast and it looks suspicious, too slow and we risk complications. 3 months of playing house. 3 months of pretending to love me while they position themselves to take everything I'd worked for. 3 months of letting me believe I'd found my happily ever after while they planned my financial destruction. I sat there in the dark, staring at that phone screen until the words blurred together, feeling like the biggest fool who ever lived. Every sweet moment, every laugh we'd shared, every time she'd told me she loved me, all of it was just part of the performance. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, though that felt like getting hit by a truck. The worst part was realizing how perfectly I'd played right into their hands. How eagerly I'd spent money I didn't have on a wedding designed to bankrupt me. How completely I'd bought into the idea that Eden Caldwell could actually love a guy like me. I was exactly what Naomi had called me at our wedding reception. A poor boy who thought he could provide for her daughter. The only difference was, now I knew they'd been planning to take everything I could provide and leave me with nothing. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, I was about to become a goddamn gourmet chef, because I spent the next 3 days walking around like a zombie while my brain worked overtime figuring out how to not get completely screwed over by my own wife and her psychotic mother. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal anymore. It was pretending like nothing had changed. I had to wake up next to Eden every morning, kiss her goodbye when she left for work, and act like I didn't know she was planning to financially eviscerate me faster than a piranha convention. You ever try to have normal conversations with someone while knowing they're actively plotting your destruction? It's like trying to pet a rattlesnake. You know it's going to bite you, but you gotta keep smiling until you figure out how to get the hell away from it. Eden kept doing her usual thing, showing me real estate listings over coffee, talking about our future, with that innocent smile that I now realized was faker than a $3 bill. She'd curl up next to me on the couch at night, head on my shoulder, while we watched TV, and I'd sit there thinking about how she was probably texting Jacob during the commercial breaks, planning which of our future assets she was going to walk away with. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because as much as every fiber of my being wanted to grab her by the shoulders and scream, "I know what you're doing, you manipulative witch," I knew that would be the stupidest move I could possibly make. These people had been playing chess while I was playing checkers, and if I was going to have any shot at not ending up completely destroyed, I needed to start thinking like they were. So I called Bernie. Bernie Kowalski was this old Polish guy who'd handled legal stuff for my family since I was a kid. He'd helped my dad with workers' comp issues, drawn up my mom's will, and generally been the kind of honest, no bullshit lawyer that you could actually trust not to rob you blind, while he was protecting you from other people robbing you blind. He worked out of this tiny office above a deli in the old part of town, surrounded by law books that looked older than Moses and a coffee pot that probably violated several health codes. I showed up at his office on Thursday morning, taking a long lunch break that I told my foreman was for a family emergency. Which, technically, wasn't even a lie. "Logan," Bernie said, looking up from a stack of paperwork that seemed to be breeding on his desk. "What brings you here, kid? Please tell me you didn't get arrested for punching somebody." "Worse," I said, settling into the cracked leather chair across from his desk. "I got married." Bernie raised an eyebrow and leaned back in his chair. "Congratulations? Or condolences? I can't tell from your tone." So I laid it all out for him. The wedding, the toast, the phone call, the text messages, the whole elaborate scheme that Eden and Naomi had cooked up to separate me from everything I'd ever worked for. Bernie listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad, his expression getting grimmer with every detail I shared. When I finished, he was quiet for a long minute, tapping his pen against his desk like he was working out some complicated math problem in his head. "Well," he finally said, "you're in a world of shit, but it's not as bad as it could be. The good news is, you found out before they could really sink their claws in. The bad news is, you're going to have to be smarter than you've ever been in your life if you want to come out of this with your ass intact." Bernie's advice was simple, but it wasn't going to be easy to follow. "Document everything," he said. "Every conversation, every text message, every email. Build a paper trail that shows exactly what they're planning. Protect your assets, move money around, secure anything that's solely in your name. And for the love of God, don't let your emotions write the story. You start screaming and yelling and carrying on, and you look like the unstable one. You want them to hang themselves with their own rope." That afternoon, I drove out to my land for the first time since before the wedding. 5 acres of rolling hills about an hour outside the city, with a view that stretched for miles and the kind of peace and quiet that made you remember why people used to live without constant noise and chaos. I'd bought this place with cash over 3 years, scraping together every overtime dollar and side job payment until I could call it mine free and clear. I stood there in the middle of my property, looking out over the empty land that Eden didn't even know existed, and for the first time since I'd heard that phone conversation, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely fucked. That's when I called Beck. Beck Morrison had been my buddy since we started working construction together 5 years ago. He was one of those guys who was solid as a rock, the kind of friend who'd help you move on a weekend, lend you money when you were broke, and tell you the truth even when you didn't want to hear it. More importantly, he'd recently started his own small construction crew after getting tired of working for other people who didn't appreciate good work. "Logan," he said when he answered the phone. "What's going on, man? You sound like somebody died." "Worse," I said, which seemed to be my standard opening line that week. "My marriage died, and I need your help building something." Beck drove out to meet me that evening, and I told him the whole story while we walked the property boundaries. He listened with that steady, calm attention that made him such a good foreman, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just letting me get it all out. "So let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "Your wife and her psychotic mother are planning to screw you out of everything you own, including stuff you haven't even bought yet?" "That's about the size of it," I said. Beck was quiet for a minute, looking out over the land as the sun started setting behind the hills. Then he started laughing. Not the cruel laugh I'd gotten used to from Eden, but the kind of laugh you get when you realize the universe has handed you the perfect opportunity to do something awesome. "You know what we're going to do?" he said, slapping me on the back hard enough to knock the wind out of me. "We're going to build you a house. Right here, right now, before those bitches even know what hit them." I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Beck, I can't afford to build a house. I just spent every penny I had on that damn wedding. Who said anything about you paying for it?" Beck grinned. "I've got a crew that could use some weekend work, and I know where to get materials at cost. Besides, my girlfriend's been after me to help her brother with his construction business. This could be perfect practice for all of us." Over the next hour, Beck laid out a plan that was so simple and brilliant I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it myself. We'd build a basic house. Nothing fancy, but solid and livable. Beck would coordinate the crew and materials. I'd provide the land and whatever cash I could scrape together, and we'd work evenings and weekends to get it done as fast as possible. "The beauty of it," Beck said, "is that this land is yours, bought and paid for before you even met Little Miss Gold Digger. She's got no legal claim to it, no way to touch it in a divorce. You build a house on it, and you've got somewhere to go when this whole thing blows up." That weekend, we started framing. Beck brought his crew, guys I'd worked with before who were happy to pick up some extra cash and help out a friend in need. We worked like men possessed, from sunrise to sunset, turning my empty 5 acres into the foundation of something real. My boss, Mr. Alvarez, found out what we were doing when he noticed me pricing lumber during my lunch break. Instead of giving me grief about it, he offered to sell me materials at cost through his supplier connections. "A man needs a place to call his own," he said with that wise nod of his, "especially when his woman is trying to take everything else." We called it the Spite House, though to me, it represented something more important than revenge. It was freedom in wood and steel, security in foundation and framing, independence in every nail we hammered and every board we raised. Every evening after work, every weekend, every spare moment I had, I was out there building my escape route. Eden thought I was working overtime to pay for our future house together. She had no idea I was actually building my way out of the trap she'd set for me. The irony was almost too perfect. While she was busy planning how to steal my money and property, I was busy creating the one asset she couldn't touch, a home that was mine and mine alone, built on land she didn't even know existed. Let her laugh about that. Turns out I was a pretty damn good actor when my financial future depended on it. Who knew? For the next month and a half, I played the role of Eden's clueless husband so well I could have won a goddamn Oscar. Every morning I'd wake up next to her, kiss her goodbye, and head off to work like I was just another hard-working schmuck trying to build a life with the woman I loved. The only difference was, now I knew exactly what kind of life she was actually trying to build, and it sure as hell didn't include me past the legal minimum required for maximum asset extraction. The trickiest part was acting normal when she'd leave those Zillow listings open on her laptop, by accident. She'd wander into the kitchen while I was having my morning coffee, stretch dramatically, and say something like, "Oh my God, Logan, you have to see this house I found. It's absolutely perfect for us." Then she'd drag me over to look at some McMansion that cost more than I'd make in 10 years, pointing out features like granite countertops and walk-in closets like they were basic human necessities instead of luxury items that would put us so far in debt we'd need a NASA-grade telescope to see daylight. "What do you think, baby?" she'd ask, snuggling up next to me while I stared at the screen showing a house that screamed financial suicide for working-class morons. "It's beautiful," I'd say, and I meant it. It was beautiful. Beautiful enough to distract a guy from noticing that his wife was setting him up like a bowling pin. "But can we actually afford something like this?" "Oh, don't worry about that," she'd say with a wave of her hand, like mortgage payments were just minor details that somehow magically worked themselves out. "Mom says there are programs for first-time buyers, and with your steady income and good credit, we should be fine. Right?" my steady income that barely covered our current expenses, and my good credit that was about to get nuked when I couldn't afford the payments on whatever overpriced dream house they were planning to stick me with. But I just nodded and smiled like the devoted husband I was supposed to be. The worst part was when Naomi would show up for her friendly visits, which had increased in frequency now that the wedding was over and Phase 2 of Operation Screw Logan was officially underway. She'd arrive with takeout from expensive restaurants and a folder full of real estate printouts, spreading them across my dining room table like a general planning a military campaign. "I've been doing some research," she'd announce, settling into my chair like she owned the place, which, according to their plan, she pretty much would soon enough. "The market is really heating up, and if we don't move soon, we're going to miss out on some incredible opportunities." She'd go through each listing like she was conducting a seminar on financial destruction, explaining why this house was perfect because of the school district, we didn't have kids, or why that one was ideal because of the investment potential with what money, or why another one was absolutely essential because of the lifestyle implications. "You want Eden to be happy, don't you, Logan?" she'd ask, looking at me with those cold blue eyes that never seemed to blink. "A woman like Eden needs room to grow, space to entertain, a home that reflects her potential." And I'd nod along like the trained seal I was pretending to be, making interested noises and asking the kinds of questions that a guy who was actually planning to buy a house might ask. Meanwhile, in the back of my head, I was thinking about how much drywall we'd gotten up on the Spite house that weekend and whether Beck's supplier could get us a deal on roofing materials. Eden would beam at me during these conversations, probably thinking I was finally getting with the program, finally understanding my role as the guy who was supposed to finance her dreams before getting kicked to the curb. She'd rub my shoulders and tell her mother how practical I was being, how responsible I was about making sure we could afford whatever palace they were planning to saddle me with. "Logan's being so smart about this," she'd say, like I was a slightly dim child who'd finally learned to tie his shoes. "He wants to make sure we do everything right." Oh, I was doing everything right, all right, just not in the way they thought. The hardest part was acting surprised and grateful when Eden would suggest I pick up more overtime shifts to boost our income for the mortgage application. She'd bring it up casually, usually while we were watching TV or lying in bed, like it was just a natural thought that had occurred to her. "You know, baby," she'd say, tracing circles on my chest with her finger, "if you could manage a few extra shifts each week, it would really help our debt-to-income ratio. Jacob says lenders love to see consistent overtime earnings." Jacob. Always fucking Jacob with his expert real estate advice and his perfect teeth and his BMW that cost more than most people's houses. I'd grit my teeth and nod thoughtfully, like this was sage financial wisdom instead of a transparent attempt to squeeze every possible dollar out of me before the inevitable divorce. "That's a great idea," I'd say. "I'll talk to Mr. Alvarez about it tomorrow." What I didn't tell her was that those overtime shifts were actually my evenings and weekends at the Spite house, where my crew and I were making serious progress on what was turning into a pretty decent little place. Nothing fancy. We weren't building a showpiece for some home and garden magazine, but it was solid, functional, and most importantly, it was mine. Even my dad started noticing that I seemed different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what had changed. We were having a beer after Sunday dinner at my parents' house when he mentioned it. "You seem more settled lately," Otis said, giving me that look that fathers give their sons when they're trying to figure out if they should be proud or worried. "Marriage agreeing with you?" I almost choked on my beer. If he only knew that what was agreeing with me was the knowledge that I was building my way out of this marriage 1-2x4 at a time. "Yeah, Dad," I said. "I guess I'm finally figuring some things out." "Good," he nodded, settling back in his chair. "Your mother was worried that you were working too much, but I told her that sometimes a man needs to put in extra hours to build something worthwhile." He had no idea how right he was. Back at home, I continued my Oscar-worthy performance as the devoted husband who was totally on board with whatever financial disaster Eden and Naomi were cooking up. I hummed approvingly at their house hunting expeditions, nodded enthusiastically at their mortgage pre-approval strategies, and even started a little notebook where I wrote down their suggestions like I was some kind of eager student learning the fundamentals of home buying. What that notebook actually contained were detailed records of every conversation, every suggestion, every not-so-subtle hint about how I needed to increase my earning potential to afford their dreams. Bernie had been right about documenting everything. I was building a paper trail that would make their scheme crystal clear to anyone who bothered to look. Meanwhile, every evening found me out at my land, hammer in hand, building something they couldn't touch, couldn't claim, and couldn't take away from me no matter how cleverly they'd planned their little gold-digging operation. The irony was almost beautiful. While Eden thought she was training me to be a better provider for the lifestyle she felt she deserved, she was actually teaching me to be more independent, more resourceful, and more determined than I'd ever been in my life. Every night, I'd come home covered in sawdust and exhaustion, and she'd ask how my overtime had gone. I'd tell her it was going great, that Mr. Alvarez was really impressed with my work ethic, and that the extra money was definitely going to help with our house fund. All of which was technically true. I was working overtime, my boss was impressed with my dedication, and I was definitely building equity in a house. It just wasn't the house Eden thought it was. But hey, they say the best lies are the ones that are mostly true, right? The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure finally arrived on a crisp Sunday morning in late October. Eden bounced into the kitchen while I was making coffee, practically vibrating with excitement like she'd just won the lottery and was about to collect her winnings. "Guess what?" she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind with the kind of enthusiasm she used to show when we first started dating. "Mom found the perfect house for us. Jacob's doing a private showing today, just for family." I had to grip the coffee mug harder to keep my hands from shaking, but I managed to turn around and give her my best, excited husband, who's definitely not planning his own revenge smile. "Really? That's amazing, babe. Tell me about it." For the next 20 minutes, Eden launched into a detailed description of what sounded like every real estate fantasy she'd ever had rolled into one overpriced package. For bedrooms, 3.5 baths, granite countertops, hardwood floors, a 2-car garage, and a yard big enough for the kids we'll have someday. The monthly payment she casually mentioned would have required me to work about 47 hours a day, but she glossed over that little detail with the kind of financial optimism that only comes from never having to actually pay for anything yourself. "Jacob says the market's really competitive right now," she continued, "but he thinks he can get us a great deal because of his relationship with the seller's agent." Jacob, of course, the man who was probably going to get a commission on the house he was helping my wife steal from me, then console her through our divorce, and then move in with her once I was out of the picture. It was like a really depressing romantic comedy, except nobody was laughing. "That's incredible," I said, pouring myself a second cup of coffee because I was going to need all the caffeine I could get to pull off what I was about to do. "I can't wait to see it." Eden's face lit up even more, if that was possible. "I knew you'd be excited. We're meeting Mom and Jacob there at 2 o'clock. Perfect. A nice family gathering to discuss how they were going to financially eviscerate me." I could hardly contain my enthusiasm. "Actually," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs, "I've got a surprise too." Eden tilted her head like a curious puppy. "A surprise? What kind of surprise?" "Well," I said, taking a sip of coffee to buy myself a few seconds, "I know we've been talking about our future and getting more serious about finding a place. So I've been working on something that I think you're really going to love." The truth was, I'd been working on something all right. Beck and his crew had finished the Spite house the weekend before. Basic but livable, with electricity, plumbing, and everything we needed to make it habitable. It wasn't going to make the cover of Better Homes and Gardens, but it was mine, it was paid for, and it was about to become the most important piece of real estate in my entire life. "Oh my God, Logan!" Eden squealed, jumping up and down like a teenager who'd just gotten asked to prom. "What is it? Did you put in an application somewhere? Did you talk to a mortgage broker?" "Something like that," I said, enjoying the way her eyes were getting wider with excitement. The poor girl thought she was about to hit the jackpot, when really she was about to find out that the game was rigged against her for once. "Why don't we do the showing with your mom and Jacob first, and then I'll take you to see my surprise." Eden agreed so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash. She spent the rest of the morning getting ready like she was preparing for a photo shoot, changing outfits 3 times, and doing her hair and makeup with the kind of precision usually reserved for rocket launches or brain surgery. At 2 o'clock sharp, we pulled into the driveway of what could generously be described as a McMansion on steroids. The thing was massive, sprawling across a lot that had probably been home to several decent-sized trees before they'd been bulldozed to make room for this monument to suburban excess. It had every feature that screams, "I'm trying way too hard to look rich." Fake columns, too many different types of siding, and windows in shapes that had no business being on a residential building. Naomi and Jacob were already there, standing by Jacob's BMW like they were posing for a real estate advertisement. Jacob looked exactly the same as always. Perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, and the kind of smile that made you want to check your wallet to make sure it was still there. Naomi was dressed like she was attending a board meeting at some Fortune 500 company, all sharp angles and expensive accessories. "Logan," Naomi called out with fake enthusiasm, giving me the kind of hug that rich people give when they're pretending to care about poor relatives. "We're so excited to show you this place. Jacob has outdone himself." Jacob stepped forward with his hand extended and that practiced real estate agent grin. "Logan, good to see you again, man. Wait until you see what we've found for you guys. This place is going to be perfect for starting your life together." Starting our life together. Right. More like finishing it, at least from my perspective. The tour was exactly what I'd expected. Jacob pointing out every expensive feature like he was conducting a symphony. Naomi making strategic comments about investment potential and future equity. And Eden oohing and awing over every room like she was walking through the palace at Versailles. The kitchen alone probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. The master bathroom was bigger than my current bedroom. The walk-in closets were the size of most people's entire apartments. And through it all, Jacob kept dropping hints about creative financing options and programs designed to help young couples achieve their dreams. "Now, I know the monthly payment might seem a little steep at first glance," Jacob said as we stood in the living room with its cathedral ceilings and massive stone fireplace. "But Naomi and I have been running some numbers, and we think we can make this work for your budget." My budget. The budget they'd been calculating without me, planning around like I was some kind of human ATM that they could program to dispense cash on command. "The key," Naomi added, "is maximizing Logan's earning potential. More overtime, maybe a second job on weekends. With the right commitment, this could absolutely be within reach." I nodded along like I was seriously considering dedicating my entire existence to paying for a house that I'd never actually own, while they stood there calculating how much of my life they could monetize. "It's beautiful," I said finally, and it was. In a soulless, over-the-top, look how much money we spent kind of way, it really was impressive. Really incredible. Eden grabbed my arm with both hands, practically bouncing with excitement. "Can you imagine us living here? Can you picture our kids playing in that huge backyard?" Our kids. Right. The kids we'd have right up until she decided I'd served my purpose and it was time to trade up to Jacob and his trust fund. "I can definitely picture it," I said, which was true. I could picture her living there with Jacob after she'd taken me for everything I was worth in divorce court. "So," Jacob said, rubbing his hands together like a cartoon villain, "what do you think? Ready to make an offer?" That's when I dropped my bombshell. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and checking the time, "before we make any big decisions, why don't you all come see my surprise? I think it might change our perspective on what we're looking for." Eden looked confused. Naomi looked suspicious. Jacob looked annoyed, like I was disrupting his carefully orchestrated sales pitch. "Your surprise?" Eden said. "I thought we were going to see it after we finished here." "Well," I said, grinning like a man who was about to play the best hand of his life, "I think it might be relevant to our house hunting discussion. Besides, it's not far from here." That wasn't exactly true. My land was about 45 minutes from the McMansion, but I figured a little car ride would give them time to work up their expectations. Let them think I'd put a down payment on something, or gotten pre-approved for a mortgage, or done something equally stupid that would make their scheme even easier to pull off. "Oh my God, Logan," Eden said, her excitement reaching levels that probably violated several noise ordinances. "Did you actually find us a house? Did you put in an offer somewhere?" "Something like that?" I said, enjoying the way all three of them were looking at me with a mixture of surprise and greed. They thought they'd been playing me this whole time, but they had no idea that I'd been 3 steps ahead of them for weeks. "Well then," Naomi said with that predatory smile I'd learned to recognize, "lead the way." And so we all piled into our respective cars, Eden riding with me, chattering nonstop about how proud she was that I'd finally taken initiative about our future, while Naomi and Jacob followed behind us in his BMW, probably congratulating themselves on how perfectly their plan was working out. If only they knew what they were driving toward. The drive to my property was 45 minutes of pure torture, listening to Eden speculate about what my surprise could be while I gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from flying apart at the seams. She was spinning elaborate fantasies about what I might have done. Maybe I'd found a fixer-upper we could renovate together, or gotten pre-approved for a mortgage that would let us compete with the McMansion, or discovered some hidden savings account that would magically solve all our financial problems. "I'm so proud of you for taking initiative," she kept saying, reaching over to squeeze my arm while I navigated the increasingly rural roads that led to my land. "I knew you had it in you. Mom's going to be so impressed when she sees that you're really serious about providing for our future. Mom's going to be impressed, all right, just not in the way Eden was expecting." Behind us, I could see Jacob's BMW in my rearview mirror, following at a respectful distance while probably having their own conversation about how perfectly their timeline was working out. 3 months of marriage, just like Naomi had planned, and here I was apparently ready to sign away my financial future for the privilege of keeping Eden happy. The paved road turned to gravel, then to the dirt track that led up to my 5 acres. Eden's chatter started slowing down as we bounced along the increasingly rough path, and I could see her looking around at the trees and open fields with growing confusion. Logan," she said, her voice losing some of that excited energy. "Where exactly are we going? This doesn't look like. There's nothing out here." "We're almost there," I said, feeling calmer than I had in months. Every bump in that dirt road was taking us closer to the moment of truth, and for the first time since our wedding, I felt like I was finally in control of the situation. Then we crested the hill, and there it was. My spite house sat in the middle of those 5 acres like a middle finger raised to the sky. It wasn't much to look at. Basic ranch style, simple lines, no fancy architectural details or expensive landscaping. But it was solid, it was finished, and it was mine in a way that nothing else in my life had ever been. Eden's mouth fell open so fast I thought her jaw might actually unhinge. She stared at the house, then at me, then back at the house, like she was trying to solve some kind of impossible puzzle. "Logan," she said slowly, "what is this?" "This," I said, pulling into the makeshift driveway that Beck and I had carved out of the hillside, "is my surprise." Behind us, Jacob's BMW came to such a sudden stop that I could hear his tires skidding on the gravel. Through my rearview mirror, I watched Naomi practically launch herself forward into the dashboard, her perfectly composed expression cracking for the first time since I'd known her. We all got out of our respective vehicles in what felt like slow motion, like some kind of Old West standoff where everyone's trying to figure out who's going to draw first. Eden was still staring at the house with this bewildered expression, while Naomi and Jacob looked like they'd just been told that gravity had been canceled, and they were all about to float away. "Logan," Naomi said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "what exactly is this supposed to be?" That's when I decided to stop pretending. "This," I said, gesturing toward the house like a game show host revealing the grand prize, "is what happens when you underestimate people. This is my house, on my land, built with my money in my hands and my friends who actually give a damn about me." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Eden was looking back and forth between me and the house like she was watching a tennis match, her brain obviously working overtime to try to figure out what the hell was happening. "Your land?" she said finally. "Logan, what are you talking about? We don't own any land." "You're right," I said, pulling the deed out of my jacket pocket. I brought it specifically for this moment. "We don't own any land. I own this land. Bought it 3 years ago, before I even met you. Paid for in cash, deed in my name only." I watched the color drain from Eden's face as the implications started sinking in. Naomi, meanwhile, had gone from confused to suspicious to what looked like barely controlled rage in about 10 seconds. "This is ridiculous," Naomi snapped. "You can't just spring something like this on Eden. If you've been hiding assets." "Hiding assets?" I interrupted, feeling my own anger starting to bubble up after months of keeping it buried. "That's funny. Coming from someone who's been planning to steal everything I owned since before our wedding cake was even cut. That's when things got interesting. Eden's confusion turned to alarm. Jacob started looking around like he was planning an escape route, and Naomi's mask finally slipped completely. "I don't know what you think you heard," Naomi said, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper I'd heard her use when she thought I was too stupid to be a threat. "But you're obviously confused about." "Logan has no idea," I said, pulling out my phone and hitting the record button right there in front of them. "Jacob says the market's heating up. Establish residency before the prenup matters. 3 months of playing house, then we transition." Eden's face went white as a sheet. Jacob actually took a step backward. "But Naomi?" Naomi went full nuclear. "You little shit," she hissed, all pretense of civility evaporating like morning dew. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Recording private conversations, sneaking around like some kind of amateur detective." "Actually," I said, enjoying this more than I probably should have, "I think I'm exactly as clever as I need to be to not get completely screwed over by my own wife and her psychotic mother." That's when Eden tried to salvage the situation with what I guess was supposed to be damage control, but came across more like a sinking ship trying to rearrange the deck chairs. "Logan, baby, please," she said, reaching for my arm with tears starting to form in her eyes. Though whether they were genuine or just another performance, I honestly couldn't tell anymore. "You don't understand. Whatever you think you heard, whatever you think this is about, we can work it out. We love each other. We can fix this. Fix this," I said, shaking off her hand. "Eden, you and your mother have spent the last 3 months planning how to steal my money, my property, and my future. You laughed, actually laughed, when she called me worthless at our own wedding reception. What exactly do you think we're going to fix?" "But we could sell this place," she said, desperation creeping into her voice as she gestured at my house. "We could use the money to buy something together, somewhere nice, somewhere that's really ours." And that's when I knew, beyond any doubt, that she still didn't get it. Even confronted with evidence of her own scheme, even caught red-handed, she was still trying to figure out how to monetize my assets. "No," I said, the word coming out flat and final. "This place is mine. This land is mine. And after today, my name is going to be mine too, because I'm filing for divorce first thing Monday morning." The word divorce hit them like a physical blow. Eden actually staggered backward. Jacob started mumbling something about needing to make some phone calls, and Naomi's face twisted into an expression of pure hatred. "You pathetic little boy," she snarled, dropping any pretense of being a civilized human being. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can embarrass my family and get away with it? We'll take everything you have. We'll destroy you in court." "With what?" I said, holding up my phone. "With the recordings of you planning to commit fraud? With the text messages between Eden and Jacob that I've been screenshotting for weeks? With the emails you sent outlining your whole timeline?" For the first time since I'd known her, Naomi Caldwell was speechless. But Eden wasn't. As the reality of the situation finally sank in, as she realized that her carefully planned future was crumbling around her feet, she showed me exactly who she really was underneath all that beauty and charm. "You bastard," she hissed, her face contorting with rage. "You pathetic, broke, worthless bastard. You think you're so smart? You think you've won something here?" And then she really let me have it. Every insult she'd probably been thinking for months came pouring out like sewage from a broken pipe. She attacked my income, my appearance, my sexual performance, my family, my intelligence, and my worth as a human being. Naomi joined in, the two of them tag-teaming me with venom that would have made a cobra jealous. And I recorded every single word of it. When they finally ran out of steam, when they'd exhausted their vocabulary of cruelty and stood there panting like rabid dogs, I stopped the recording and looked them each in the eye. "Take what you brought into my life," I said, my voice steady as bedrock. "Nothing more. Leave my home. Leave my land. Leave my name. And if I ever see any of you on my property again, I'm calling the cops for trespassing." I turned and walked toward my house, leaving them standing there in my driveway, probably still trying to figure out how their perfect plan had gone so spectacularly wrong. The Spite house had never looked more beautiful. 2 weeks later, they showed up again. I was sitting on the front porch of the Spite house, drinking my morning coffee and watching the sunrise paint the hills in shades of gold and orange. when I saw the dust cloud coming up my gravel driveway. 3 cars this time: Naomi's silver Mercedes, Eden's little sedan, and Jacob's BMW, bringing up the rear like some kind of pathetic parade of people who clearly hadn't gotten the message. My first instinct was to go inside and lock the door, maybe call the sheriff and report them for trespassing. But then I remembered what Bernie had told me during our last meeting. Sometimes the best defense is letting your enemies dig their own graves deeper. So I stayed right where I was, sipping my coffee and watching them park in a neat little line like they were arriving for a business meeting. They climbed out of their cars with the kind of confidence that told me they thought they'd figured out some new angle, some way to turn this whole situation back to their advantage. Eden was dressed like she was going to a job interview, all professional and put together. Naomi looked like she'd stepped out of a boardroom, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. And Jacob was wearing his standard real estate agent uniform. Expensive suit, fake smile, and the kind of haircut that screamed, "Trust me with your life savings." But here's the thing they didn't know. I'd been busy those 2 weeks. Really busy. "Logan," Naomi called out as they approached the porch, her voice dripping with fake sweetness like maple syrup on poison. "We need to talk." "No," I said, not getting up from my chair. "We really don't." "Please," Eden added, and I had to give her credit. She'd really worked on her innocent victim expression. "Just give us 5 minutes. There are things you don't understand, things we need to explain." That's when my surprise walked around the corner of the house. First came Beck, wiping his hands on a shop rag and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Then Cannon and Tino, my old work buddies who'd been putting in overtime on the house project. Behind them came my dad, Otis, looking like he was ready to throw down with anyone who so much as looked at me sideways. My mom, Linda, appeared next, carrying a plate of what looked like her famous chocolate chip cookies. And bringing up the rear, like some kind of legal cavalry, was Bernie in his rumpled suit and crooked tie. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part was what Beck was carrying in his other hand. A thick manila folder that he tossed to Bernie with the casual ease of someone passing along the morning newspaper. "Everything's here," Beck announced to the group, but loud enough for our unwelcome visitors to hear every word. Property records, construction permits, receipts for materials, photos documenting the entire build process, and the independent appraisal we commissioned last week. Bernie caught the folder and opened it with the kind of theatrical flair that made me think he'd missed his calling as a courtroom lawyer. He pulled out what looked like an official document and held it up like he was about to read the Declaration of Independence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in his best legal voice, "I have here the official property appraisal for this 5-acre parcel and the recently constructed dwelling. Current market value." He paused for dramatic effect, looking over his glasses at our 3 visitors. $437,000. I watched Naomi's face go through several interesting color changes. Eden's mouth fell open, so far I was worried she might dislocate her jaw. Jacob started looking around like he was trying to figure out if he'd accidentally walked into some kind of elaborate prank show. Furthermore, Bernie continued, clearly enjoying himself. "All property records confirm that this land was purchased outright by Logan Mitchell 3 years ago, prior to any romantic relationship with Eden Caldwell. The dwelling was constructed entirely with private funds and volunteer labor, also prior to the establishment of any marital property claims." He looked directly at Naomi when he delivered the next part. "In layman's terms, none of you have any legal claim to any of this. Not the land, not the house, not so much as a single nail in the foundation." "That's impossible," Naomi sputtered, her composure finally cracking. "He's a construction worker. He doesn't have that kind of money." "Actually," my dad Otis said, stepping forward with the kind of quiet pride that made my chest tight, "he does. Boy's been saving since he was 16, working overtime and side jobs, putting away every penny he could. Never spent money on flashy cars or expensive clothes or trying to impress people who weren't worth impressing." That last part was aimed directly at Eden, and from the way she flinched, it hit its target. Cannon decided to add his 2 cents. "Plus, he's been getting materials at cost through Mr. Alvarez's supplier connections, and we've all been donating our time because that's what you do for family. Real family." "This is harassment," Eden said, but her voice was shaky and she kept glancing around like she was looking for an escape route. "You can't just..." You can't ambush us like this. Ambush? My mom Linda said, and I'd never heard that particular tone from her before. Sweet as honey on the surface, but sharp enough to cut glass underneath. Honey, you're the ones who showed up uninvited on someone else's property. We're just here having a family gathering. Bernie pulled out another document. Speaking of uninvited visits, I have here printed transcripts of text messages between Eden Mitchell and Naomi Caldwell, outlining their plan to manipulate Logan into purchasing property that would later be claimed in a divorce settlement. I also have recorded conversations detailing their timeline for marriage fraud. He looked up from the papers with the kind of smile that probably made opposing lawyers wake up in cold sweats. Any further harassment, any attempts at contact, any lies posted on social media, and these documents go straight to the district attorney's office. Marriage fraud is a federal crime, ladies and gentlemen. It carries some very serious penalties. Naomi's face had gone from red to white to an interesting shade of purple. You can't prove anything. Those messages could be taken out of context. Actually, I said, finally standing up from my chair, I can prove everything. See, the thing about thinking someone's too stupid to catch on to your scheme is that you stop being careful about covering your tracks. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved everything: screenshots, audio recordings, copies of emails I'd managed to access when Eden left her laptop open. I've got your voice, Eden, telling Jacob that I had no idea what you were planning. I've got Naomi's emails about establishing residency and working around prenup issues. I've got Jacob's texts about helping you find properties that would be easy to claim in a divorce. Jacob finally found his voice. This is entrapment. You can't record people without their consent. Actually, Bernie said cheerfully, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Since Logan was part of every conversation he recorded, everything's perfectly legal. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my dad's watch ticking from 10 feet away. Eden looked like she was about to cry, Naomi looked like she was planning someone's murder, and Jacob looked like he was calculating how fast he could get back to his car. That's when Eden tried one last desperate play. Logan, she said, stepping forward with her hand extended like she was trying to reach across some great divide. Please, we can fix this. We can start over. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. We can make this work. For just a second, and I mean just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked so small standing there in front of my family and friends, so desperate and lost. But then I remembered that laugh at our wedding reception. I remembered the phone calls and the text messages and the months of being treated like a walking ATM. No, I said, pulling my hand away before she could touch me. We can't. You laughed when your mother called me worthless at our own wedding reception. That laugh told me everything I needed to know about what you really thought of me. I looked at all three of them. This woman I'd thought I loved, her psychotic mother, and the slimy ex-boyfriend who'd been planning to help them steal my future. You want to know what the real surprise is? I said, it's not the house. It's not the land value. It's not even the evidence that could land you in federal prison. I gestured to the group of people standing behind me, Beck with his loyal grin, Cannon and Tino ready to have my back no matter what, my parents looking at me with the kind of pride that made me feel 10 feet tall, and Bernie with his folder full of legal ammunition. The real surprise is that you couldn't shame me out of the people who actually give a damn about me. You couldn't turn me against the family and friends who showed up to help build something real instead of trying to tear it down. You couldn't make me into the worthless loser you wanted me to be. Eden's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize, might actually show some real emotion instead of calculated manipulation. Instead, she turned and walked back to her car without another word. Naomi followed, but not before stopping to give me one last poisonous look. This isn't over, she said. Yeah, I replied, settling back into my chair with my coffee. It really is. As I watched their cars disappear down my driveway, kicking up dust clouds that settled back into the peaceful silence of my 5 acres, I realized that for the first time since our wedding day, I wasn't thinking about Eden's laugh at all. I was thinking about how good it felt to finally be home.